They kicked in the wrong door. Splinters flew, glass rattled, and 3 officers stormed inside with rifles raised, ready to crush another so-called criminal. But within seconds, their biggest mistake became clear. Because the woman staring back at them wasn't panicked. She wasn't scrambling or pleading. She was calm. Too calm. Diana Marshall sat upright on her bed, hands already raised, dark eyes fixed on the chaos. Her face carried no fear, only quiet calculation. "Hands where we can see them," one officer barked, sweeping his flashlight across the room. She obeyed, moving slowly, deliberately. But under the blanket, just inches from her thigh, a tiny red light blinked to life. Her own recorder. Her own camera. She had been waiting for this. The officers tore through her drawers, ripping open cabinets, flipping papers. Their boots crushed family photos, grinding frames into the carpet. In less than a minute, one of them held up a small plastic bag, shaking it like a prize. "Found it. Cocaine. She's done." Too perfect, too fast. Exactly the kind of evidence you only find when you've planted it yourself. The sergeant stepped closer, cuffs in hand. "Stand up. You're under arrest." Diana rose slowly, wrists offered forward, her gaze unblinking. The cuffs bit into her skin as he tightened them hard, almost eager to hear her wince. But she didn't wince. She didn't fight. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, voice low but steady. "Everything you're doing is on the record." The officers froze for a fraction of a second, confusion darting across their faces. What did she mean? None of them noticed the blinking red light tucked just out of sight, recording every illegal search, every laugh, every word. Diana knew the truth. She wasn't the one on trial tonight. They were. Dragged through the doorway, her bare feet scraping against the cold floor, she let one final thought echo in her mind. They hadn't arrested a suspect. They had just kicked in the door of the woman investigating them. The cuffs clamped tighter around Diana's wrists, the steel biting her skin. The sergeant's smirk widened as if pain was the only language he trusted. "Looks like we've got ourselves a dealer," he muttered, holding up the plastic bag for the others to admire. Diana's eyes dropped briefly to the bag. Her voice, when it came, was calm and precise, the way someone might explain an equation to a child. "You'll need to state your badge numbers for the record." The sergeant laughed. "Badge numbers, sweetheart? You're not in a position to be asking questions." Diana's lips curved just slightly. "Actually, under Title 18, Section 242, failure to identify during an arrest can be construed as willful misconduct." The youngest officer hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. He glanced down at his badge as though it suddenly weighed 100 pounds. "Shut up and keep moving," the sergeant barked, yanking Diana toward the hall. She stumbled forward but never lost her composure. "Do you have a warrant?" she asked, her voice steady. "Don't need one when we've got this," the second officer replied, shaking the bag again. Diana's tone sharpened slightly, still quiet but cutting through their noise. "That's an unlawful search. Evidence obtained this way will be inadmissible." The sergeant stopped short, leaning close to her ear. His breath was heavy, sour with coffee. "Lady, no one's ever going to hear about this. Understand?" Diana met his eyes, unblinking, unafraid. "Everything you've done is already heard." For a flicker of a second, something in his face cracked, confusion, maybe even fear. But then he shoved it down with another hard tug on her cuffs. They dragged her down the stairwell, boots echoing like drums. A neighbor cracked her door open just wide enough to peek, then shut it fast when the sergeant's glare swept her way. On the street, the police car waited, engine rumbling. They shoved Diana into the back seat, the cuffs forcing her shoulders into an awkward angle. Still, she sat straight, chin high, every inch of her radiating a dignity they couldn't crush. The youngest officer lingered by the door before shutting it. His eyes darted to hers. Something in them looked unsettled. "You don't look scared," he muttered. Diana tilted her head. Fear isn't the same as silence. Silence is strategy. The words landed heavier than he expected. He closed the door without replying. The ride to the precinct was filled with the crackle of their radios and the hollow bragging of the sergeant. Diana didn't argue. She simply observed, memorizing every word, every detail. Her recorder did the rest. At the station entrance, they pulled her out roughly, parading her past officers who barely looked up from their desks. It was routine for them. Just another criminal. But Diana wasn't routine. Inside the booking room, they shoved her toward a chair. The sergeant leaned over, pressing his weight into the cuffs as he clicked them tighter one last time, almost daring her to break. Diana's voice sliced through the room, calm but undeniable. I did not consent to this search. The words rang out, cold and clear, the kind that linger long after the sound fades. And for the first time, silence filled the precinct. The fluorescent lights in the precinct buzzed overhead, washing the booking desk in a harsh white glare. Diana stood between two officers, wrists still cuffed, her expression composed. The desk sergeant, an older man with deep lines carved into his face, barely looked up at first. He reached for the intake forms, ready to process another late-night arrest. Routine. Name, he asked monotone. Marshal, Diana. The sergeant in charge answered for her, tossing the plastic bag of evidence onto the counter. The desk sergeant typed it in, his fingers, tapping lazily against the keys until the monitor flashed red. A notification slid across the screen. Federal database match. Clearance level restricted. The man's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, adjusting his glasses. A badge number, a clearance code, something that had no business being tied to an alleged drug dealer. Hold on, he muttered, double-checking the entry. Where exactly did you pick her up? Apartment off 8th, the sergeant said casually. Anonymous tip. Drugs were right there. The desk sergeant's jaw tightened. His voice was sharper now. You sure about that? Diana said nothing. She didn't need to. The flag on the screen was already speaking for her. Before the exchange could go further, another officer stepped closer. Officer Johnson, the youngest of the group. He had been quiet during the raid, quiet during the ride. Now his unease was visible in the crease between his brows. Can I review the body cam footage? He asked carefully. The sergeant glared at him. What for? Johnson hesitated, then straightened. Protocol, chain of evidence. Reluctantly, the sergeant tossed him the device. Knock yourself out. Johnson retreated to a corner desk, plugging the camera into the terminal. The video flickered to life, grainy but clear enough. He fast-forwarded past the door kick, past the shouting, past the chaos, until the moment that had gnawed at him. There. The discovery. He slowed it down, frame by frame. His eyes narrowed as he watched one officer shove aside papers, then, almost too casually, slip a hand into his vest pocket and pull out the plastic bag. The angle caught it. Barely, but enough. Johnson's stomach tightened. He replayed it twice, 3 times. No mistake. The drugs hadn't been found. They had been planted. He glanced over his shoulder. The sergeant and the others were laughing, filling out paperwork as if nothing was wrong. Diana stood silently, her posture unbroken, her eyes fixed on him with a calm that made his chest heavy. Her silence wasn't helplessness. It was certainty. Johnson turned back to the screen. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached for his phone, shielding it behind the monitor. His fingers hovered, trembling slightly. There was a number every officer knew about but never dared to dial. A hotline whispered about in training, the direct line to the Bureau's Office of Internal Integrity. Anonymous. Secure. He inhaled sharply, glanced at Diana one more time, then pressed the digits. The line clicked alive, a voice on the other end cold and professional. FBI Integrity Division, state your report. Johnson lowered his voice, barely above a whisper. This is Officer Johnson. We've got a problem. In the holding room, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of old coffee and disinfectant. Diana sat cuffed to a steel chair, her wrists marked but her posture steady. The officers outside thought they had control. They had no idea control had slipped from them the second they entered her apartment, because Diana Marshall was never unprepared. Beneath the fabric of her sleeve, sewn into the lining of her jacket, a small device hummed quietly. No bigger than a coin, invisible to anyone not looking for it. She shifted her wrist, pressing her pulse deliberately against the metal. 3 seconds. 4. A soft vibration confirmed it. Her emergency beacon was live. Miles away, inside the FBI's Cyber Command Center, a red alert pulsed across the monitors. Coordinates locked. Status: Agent Marshall, distress signal active. Assistant Director Luis Rodriguez was in his office when the knock came. A junior analyst pushed the door open, face pale. "Sir, it's Marshall. The beacon." Rodriguez was on his feet before the sentence ended. "Show me." In the command center, the room buzzed with tension. The screen displayed Diana's profile. Decorated agent, 15 years in deep cover assignments. Current operation, Operation Cleanhouse. Target, systemic corruption within the city's police force. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. He had warned her about the risks. But Diana never backed down from fire. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Precinct 14, the analyst replied. "Signal steady. We also received an anonymous tip routed to Integrity, an officer calling in about planted evidence." That sealed it. Rodriguez turned to the room. His voice cut through the noise like steel. "Mobilize the task force, now. Marshall's cover is burned." Agents scrambled into motion. Secure radios crackled, calls shot out across divisions. Tactical units checked weapons and loaded gear. Vehicles roared to life in the underground garage. Rodriguez paced, his mind sharp, every move calculated. "We've waited 15 years for this. 15 years of files, surveillance, and witness silences. If Marshall's in custody, it means they know, or they think they know. Either way, this is it." On the monitors, bodycam footage streamed in from the officer who had called Integrity. Grainy images showed the bag being slipped from a pocket, the smirk on a sergeant's face. Evidence, not rumor, not speculation. Proof. Rodriguez felt the weight of it. Diana hadn't just been investigating corruption. She had been building a noose with their own rope. "Sir," a field commander asked, helmet under his arm, "rules of engagement?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "This isn't a negotiation. This is an extraction and a takedown. We go in hard, we go in clean." The commander nodded, already relaying orders. Rodriguez leaned over the map, glowing on the table. Red pins marked precinct locations, yellow pins the suspected officers. At the center, Precinct 14 pulsed with a blinking light. He straightened, his voice cold and certain. "Operation Cleanhouse is compromised. Full federal response." The room went still for half a beat, then erupted into motion, the kind of orchestrated chaos only federal agents could wield. And in the holding room across town, Diana closed her eyes briefly. The faint vibration against her wrist told her everything she needed to know. The storm she had been waiting for was finally on its way. The precinct buzzed with the hollow rhythm of routine, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, radios spitting static. To the officers lounging at their desks, it was just another night. They didn't notice the silence outside building walls, the way traffic had thinned, or the faint vibration in the floor that wasn't from passing cars. The storm arrived all at once. The front doors blasted open, reinforced hinges slamming against the walls as a surge of black-clad agents poured in. FBI tactical units flooded the lobby with precision. Shields raised, rifles angled down, but steady. Commands cut through the chaos. "Federal agents, hands visible now." Desks overturned, chairs scraped, and shouts collided in the air. Officers who only hours ago swaggered with false confidence froze mid-sentence. Some fumbled for radios. Others lifted trembling hands. The smirking sergeant from Diana's arrest stood stiff, his face drained of color. One by one, weapons were confiscated, badges stripped from belts. "Detective Morrison, you are under federal arrest for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering." Sergeant Bradley, unlawful search and conspiracy under Title 18. The charges rolled out like thunder, each name pinned with a crime. The younger officer, Johnson, stood to the side, wide-eyed but untouched. A quiet nod from the lead agent was the only recognition he received, the difference between guilt and conscience. In the holding room, Diana heard the first crash of doors, the orders barked with authority that wasn't corrupt. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Moments later, the cuffs were unlocked by steady hands. "Agent Marshall," an agent said briskly, "you're free. Rodriguez wants you outside." She stood, rolling her wrists, blood flowing back into her hands. With calm certainty, she followed them through the corridor, every step measured. When she emerged into the main bullpen, the room had transformed. The officers who had mocked her were now lined against the wall, wrists bound with the same steel they once wielded carelessly. Papers fluttered in the air from overturned desks, radios squawked unanswered. The entire illusion of their power had collapsed in minutes. And then the room shifted again, because Diana Marshall didn't walk in as a suspect. She walked in wearing the midnight blue windbreaker with bold yellow letters stamped across the back. FBI. Gasps rippled through the precinct. Officers who had sneered at her less than an hour ago now stared as if seeing a ghost. Their criminal had become their prosecutor. She stopped in the center of the room, pulling a slim folder from under her arm. Her voice, calm but sharp as glass, cut through the silence. "For the record," she began, "this precinct has been under federal investigation for 15 years. Morrison shifted in his cuffs, rage flashing in his eyes. "You set us up." Diana turned toward him, steady, unflinching. "No, you set yourselves up. I just pressed record." Rodriguez appeared at her side, arms folded, his presence sealing the weight of what had just unfolded. But it was Diana's voice the room followed. She opened the folder, pages rustling like a verdict waiting to be delivered, and one by one she began to read. Detective Morrison, bribery, falsification of evidence, assault under color of law. Sergeant Bradley, perjury, unlawful detainment. Her words landed like hammers, each charge striking heavier than the last. And the corrupt officers, once so loud, so sure, could only sit in silence, their empire of lies crumbling around them. The courtroom was packed to the rafters. Reporters jostled for seats, their pens poised, cameras hidden discreetly behind briefcases. Families of victims filled the benches, their faces taut with hope and anger. At the front, the defendants sat shackled, their uniforms replaced by prison jumpsuits. For the first time in years, they weren't the ones in control. The judge entered, robes flowing, gavel striking against the wood. Court is now in session. The prosecution's evidence played like a slow, damning symphony. Body cam footage flickered across the monitors, grainy but undeniable. The exact moment a sergeant pulled a bag from his vest. The laughter as they mocked Miranda rights. The silence of neighbors too afraid to speak. Every detail Diana had collected for 15 years now stood in the open, stripped of shadows. One by one, witnesses testified. Former officers, pressured into silence for years, now stood tall. Johnson, the young cop who had made the anonymous call, spoke with a tremor in his voice but truth in his eyes. "I thought loyalty meant protecting them, but it means protecting what's right." The defense sputtered, reaching for loopholes, for technicalities, but there was nothing left to grasp. The crimes were too many, the evidence too solid. When the time for verdict came, the jury didn't deliberate for long. On the charge of conspiracy under color of law, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendants guilty. The words rang out again and again, a hammer falling until the walls themselves seemed to echo. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The judge leaned forward, voice heavy with finality. Given the gravity of these crimes and the breach of public trust, this court sentences Detective Morrison to 35 years federal imprisonment, Sergeant Bradley, 28 years, Captain Wilson, life without parole. Gasps rippled through the room. Some victims wept quietly. Others clutched one another. Relief. Flooding faces etched by years of waiting. For once, the system hadn't buried the truth, it had delivered it. Through it all, Diana sat silent at the prosecution's table, her posture unshaken, her expression composed. This wasn't triumph for her. It wasn't revenge. It was balance restored. When the judge adjourned and the gavel fell for the last time, the room buzzed with noise. Reporters swarmed, families embraced, officers led the convicted men away in chains. And then, as the crowd shifted, Diana rose. The cameras turned. Microphones surged toward her. But she didn't speak to the press. She spoke to the room, her voice low but carrying. Justice is rarely quick. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits in silence, patient as stone. But when it comes, she paused, her gaze steady on the rows of stunned faces. It leaves no doubt. The room hushed again, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a verdict of their own. She turned, the gold letters of FBI across her jacket catching the light, and walked toward the exit. No fanfare, no raised fist. Just quiet dignity, each step measured, each step her own. As she pushed open the heavy courthouse doors, sunlight poured in, spilling across the marble floor. The noise of the city rushed back, horns blaring, footsteps echoing, life continuing as if nothing monumental had just occurred. But for those who had witnessed it, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Because Diana Marshall had proven that truth could outlast lies, that patience could outlast corruption, and that strength wasn't in shouting, it was in never breaking. And for everyone who had doubted her, for every whisper that she couldn't, for every sneer that tried to silence her, the question now lingered like a challenge. Would you have believed her, or doubted her too?